Well, hello.
Hi. So 40 minutes, right?
Set your timer. Well, this is truly an honor to be involved in the launch of this astounding book, this deep memoir of life and love and loss, and set against, in the current of history, major work of writing.
Wow, okay, so we're good. Thank you for coming out. And be sure to enter the raffle. No, but thank you.
When did you think you were ready to write this?
That's a good question. First of all, I just want to thank Lucy for being here. Lucy is a writer who I and many other people in this room have stolen quite a bit from and been inspired by. And it's just really overwhelming to be in this room with so many people I admire, so many friends who are in the book, some of whom do very embarrassing things in the book. There are so many sort of great writers and artists and musicians and people that I just really cherish. So it's very special to be able to see all my friends at once. So thank you for being here. I don't know if I felt ready until I was actually writing things. I have been writing sentences that went into the book since kind of the immediate aftermath of the event that's central to the book. But I didn't feel ready until fairly recently, maybe a couple years ago. I think a lot of the writing sort of verged toward incredibly melodramatic kind of, it just sort of touched on the darkest intensities. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that it had to be more than that. So I don't even know if I still feel ready for it to be a thing or to talk about it necessarily, but it's too late for that part, I guess. So.
There's this repeating theme of history and how the past makes you, how the future makes the past look different. What was the biggest surprise, if looking back, or was there?
I don't know. There's so much that it sounds so bizarre because as a writer, I tend to be very straightforward. When I'm writing journalism, I'm pretty neurotic about where things are, kind of spatially. I know where something begins and ends. And as I was working on this book, there were a lot of times when it sounds so weird, but actually it doesn't sound weird at all. It's something that writers say all the time, but I wasn't conscious of what I was doing. I was just sort of processing and just sort of being inspired by these pictures I put up on the wall. But the whole idea of being more forward-looking, understanding that you need to look towards the future, you need to understand what tomorrow can bring as a way of making sense of the present. It's not something that I really understood when I was younger. I think in the immediate aftermath of things that happened, I was very much stuck in the past. And for many years, I would just sit there on certain days of the year at certain times and just write about the past and try and render in sort of as precise detail as I could what, a flesh tone, or a smell, or kind of what it was like to unwrap a burrito, things that were very much rooted in these moments in the past. But it wasn't until I think fairly recently, honestly, that I understood that none of these things need to become something else. I need to turn them into some sense of a future I would want, or an ethos that I could bring into my life to share with other people, whether it was just becoming a better friend or, becoming a more conscious person.
Do you listen to music when you're writing?
Do you?
No.
Not at all?
I just can't. I want to hear what you had to say.
Well, I'll eventually get there, but do you write in silence or?
You know, I've got some kind of count going on in my head, like syllable count.
Huh.
And if there's, I mean, it's okay if trucks back up or birds fly in or whatever, but if there's regular beat, it throws me off. I can't do it.
Huh, wow. You know, so when you're writing about, I'm not, the strategy isn't to turn this into a reverse Q&A, but like when you're writing about like an old reggae 7-inch, do you consult it, or are you writing about your memory of hearing these songs?
Well, I mean, I will probably listen to it that day. I just won't be listening to it while I'm actually writing, you know?
Yeah. My cousin, who is not here right now, he's a digital nomad now. He, one time I was subletting his apartment and he played Avril Lavigne's Complicated 180 times in a row. And I was next door, and I just heard this song on a loop, and it reminded me first that when I heard the Avril Lavigne Advance, I was like, no one will ever like this. Sort of calling into question my critical apparatus, which is something I have no faith in anymore. But it was also kind of incredible he was like designing something, and I asked him about it, and he said, you know, I just need to hear this one song on a loop. Not that song, but a song on a loop. And it actually struck me that like he was more immersed in the experience of that song than I normally am, even as a music critic or as a DJ. Like he was so tapped into Complicated that it sort of allowed him to, you know, design stuff. And I found it to be like incredibly moving. I generally write with sound because I just find silence terrifying. So I will be listening to music, but when I was writing this book, I joined streaming platforms for the first time. Like I'd never really used any of these things because I'm very old-fashioned. And so I would make these hyper-specific playlists about like, this is what we would have been listening to spring of 1996. Like this is what I listened to August of 1998. And it sounds kind of silly, to me at least, but I would listen to these playlists obsessively while I was writing and just sort of rock back in my seat as though I was like a circa 2002 like freestyle rapper or something, and I was about to like, I was just trying to catch the beat. But it was like, it was actually like incredibly different to try and like catch these rhythms that weren't things that I would normally listen to while I was writing. So when I was writing this book, I would listen to a lot of music really obsessively. I mean, I don't know, this doesn't really spoil anything, but there's this sort of breaking point in the book, but also in my own like listening history where I just sort of stopped listening to a lot of music I was super into from like 1992 to 1998. And I don't really go back to a lot of that music, but in the course of writing this, I would find myself kind of falling into these deep pockets. Spotify actually like really sucked for that because it's not as comprehensive as people think, but it was really great to just kind of have these moments where I was kind of trying to replicate what it was like to listen to music obsessively as a young person. Just kind of that limited window of like, these are the 7 inches I bought at Amoeba like this month in 1996, so.
And I mean, do they still have that kind of Proust cookie effect? You know, like you hear that song and you're back in that year. I know it depends on how consistently you've listened to it over the years, right?
I'm sorry, I have to ask you the same question. I mean, are you able to conjure up like a whole archive of memories?
Well, it's a funny thing I've noticed. Like some of my favorite songs by now, they're like stripped of association because I've just been playing them for sometimes 50 years, you know. But if it's some oddball B-side that I was really into at one point and just haven't heard in all that time, then it's got a charge. Yeah,
no, I feel the same way. I think that I did this piece, I profiled this poet, Nate Mackey, a couple years ago, and because it was on Zoom, we would just listen to music together. And he had this phrase about hearing all of the previous times he heard it, Like a song indexed a lifetime of listening to things. And so we'd be listening to Miles Davis's, sketches of Spain, and it's not that he was remembering, he just sort of remembered all of it was just like this accretion, right? Like these stacked moments of of remembering when he was 35, when he remembered when he heard it for the first time when he was 14. And I think that's hard to avoid sometimes, but I think it's harder to recover that too, because I think the way a lot of people listen to music, myself included, it's just sort of this endless stream of things that don't really allow you that moment of deliberation. Maybe you don't want it, which is totally fair as well. But I do find myself, there are certain songs I was like super into in like 1997 that like aren't on streaming, like there's no CD, but it has like a YouTube video with 100 views. And for some reason that hits different, because you're sort of like, there are only so many people in the world who have had an experience with this song and care about it 25 years later. So, but yeah, there is sort of that Proustian quality still, but it's never about the lyrics. It's always about just a sound.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When you mentioned that before, I was like startled, because so often, people are sad, so they listen to a song that's about being sad. But I mean, if you don't know if you kind of don't pay attention to the lyrics, you might not know it's supposed to be a sad song.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you absorb. Okay, how do you absorb music? Through the rhythm, the melody? I mean, what's the first thing that strikes you?
I don't know. Because I'm as a judge of character and as a listener, I'm bad at first. So I think there are a lot of things that I don't necessarily. Like I hear things, and I'm like, I'm not.
I mean, come on, you're one of the first people in America who heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
No, I was probably among the first 200,000 people, but I mean, I think in that case it actually just sounded like something my parents would like, but the fact that they hadn't told me about it is what marked that as a singular experience, But I do think that I like the anticipatory, that moment before the song kicks in. Like, I love, I don't know if it's in the book. It's mentioned in the book, but I don't mention the song. But, in the book, there's this moment where my friends and I returned from a funeral, and the first song I listened to was The Far Side's Runnin', which is like a fucking great song. But I felt like incredibly, it just really... I don't know, it just destroyed me before the beat kicks in, like the Louise Bonfa sample, I think it's just sort of these guitars, and before the actual like Dilla drums come in, I had to like run across the room and turn it off, because it was something about like knowing that the beat was going to drop soon that really upset me in that moment. So I think that, the lyrics themselves I've misheard thousands of times and ascribed this like emotional kind of meaning to, but it's really just the moment in the song before the actual song starts that I found like really moving in that moment. So I think it has to do with texture.
Good answer. So I'm going to just keep bothering you with questions about your writing technique. Do you start like at the top left corner and work your way down to the bottom right corner? I mean, I mean that like, in general. I mean, do you start a book at the beginning and work your way to the end? Or do you do patches here and there and edit them together more like making a movie?
I asked someone, an advisor this question when I was in graduate school. I said, how do you structure your pieces? Where do you start? Like, how do you? And the person says, well, Hua, I start with the first sentence, then I write the next sentence, I write the next sentence, and then I'm done. And I was just like, that's like a bizarre piece of advice to give someone. Just weird flex. But I tend to assume that if I know how a piece begins and ends, that I'm 90% done. And then at 4 a.m, I'm like, I have like 1,500 words that go between it that I need to account for. But I'm very interested in sort of pretending up top that I have authority, that I have some sort of critical authority, and then by the end, hopefully it's sort of been unraveled, or there's some sense of like, yeah, like you should join in and have your own opinion here too. So I do start at the top left corner, yeah. But and then I know where it's going to end, but the middle can just, it's sort of like Tetris or something, or I don't know if that's the right, you know what I'm talking about. It just sort of it just sort of works its way. It's just a matter of rearranging things. It's not very linear.
Mm-hmm. And do you do full revisions, or do you tinker endlessly?
I will read things back to myself as I'm writing. Like, I'll whisper to myself, and then at 3 a.m, I'll realize I'm parched because I've just been talking to myself for hours on end. But I mean, I'm also I would be remiss not to shout out all, many of my editors are here tonight, and I've learned so much about not just revision, but storytelling and structure and clarity. So thanks to all of you, you know who you are. But yeah, I tend to be like obsessive about kind of moving things around and editing.
Do you find yourself doing revisions in your dreams?
Do you?
Yes, I have. Because, I mean, I'm writing a book right now. Even as you see me, I'm writing a book. And I find that, I will become so invested in the words, the sentences, that I'll be rewriting it as I go to the bathroom, eat dinner, maybe like make myself take a break and watch a movie, still rewriting it. And then in my dreams, I will be like, sentences will show up on my, dream screen.
Like in your dream, you're typing?
No, it's just the words. It's
Wow.
not like the physical operation.
No, I've never had that experience before. I am always like writing when I drive, because I tend to drive a lot. And I remember hearing the rapper Ludacris talk about how he would also like write. He was like a radio promo guy, and he would be driving around, and he had a notebook, and he would just write as he was driving on his dashboard. And I thought, like, yeah, that's kind of what I do too. Not to the same levels of remuneration, but I thought it is a space where I tend to write and revise a lot. Like, I'm always trying to figure out, like, what's the first sentence going to be, like, while I'm driving. And so, but never dreaming. Like, sometimes I'll try and think of things the moment I wake up, but it doesn't go well, usually.
I'm not suggesting that your dreams are like the dream appearances or any kind of solution. It's just more obsessive rotation, really.
Like, what's the best, or what's your favorite line that you've come up with in your subconscious?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Ask me next week. I mean, I do remember what I've written, kinda, but I wouldn't be able to quote a single sentence right now. How about you? What's your favorite line you've written unconsciously?
My favorite line of yours that you've written on. I don't know. I have no favorite lines of my own. I find myself embarrassing. So.
Yeah, please, false modesty. So what's next for you? So now I'm being just straight TV talk show host. What's next for Hua Hsu?
I don't know. I don't. I've been thinking about this book for so long. It's weird for me to think about, and it sort of was this weird justification in the back of. I realize that I've only been looking this way. It was sort of this weird justification in my mind of, like, I remember working on this review of like a Nelly CD for Entertainment Weekly or something, and not having that much to say, but then just thinking like, you need to figure out how to describe this song because there are these other things you want to describe down the line. And so it did sort of function as this, like this motor. And now that I've done it, I mean, and feel like it's sort of what I wanted to do, even though I didn't know I wanted to do it. I didn't think this is the shape it would take. I kind of feel a little adrift. Like I'm not totally sure what I want to do next, other than the other book I owe to my editor, who's sitting in the front row.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that. There must be a kind of loss associated with just coming to the end of the manuscript, and especially with this one, right?
Yeah, and it's particularly weird for me because because I've turned myself into a character, and I've turned people in my life who I really value into characters. And I think I'm the one who gets dunked on the most. Like, I am the caricature in the book, I think, more than a lot of my friends are, except for Sean, who is here tonight, who AKA Buck Wild, he is also a caricature. He's not what he was like in college. But it's very weird, I think, to now function that way, because I find myself not necessarily like preemptively reacting to that, but it's just strange to now kind of submitted myself into the culture as a character, or as someone whose motives and interests and passions are probably seem more discreet than they were to me at the time or are to me now. So I don't know, that'll be like a weird challenge to write myself out of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I also meant, there's that, but there's also the fact that, you've made something, you've enshrined something, you've made, from this patchwork of memories, which are very vivid and which rocket through you and, maybe disappear for a while and then come back with renewed force, all this stuff, this investment in memory. And it's all been fluid for all these years. It's come and gone. And now you've gone and put it into a box. Mm-hmm. I mean, that must feel kind of wrenching, right?
Did you say wrenching?
Wrenching. Yeah,
absolutely. I've put a lot of these things into a literal box. There were a lot of, if you've read the book or seen me walk around here tonight, just like distributing ephemera around the room, I'm very into things and stuff and just sort of these triggers that we wear or carry with us or buy or sell. And I think for a long time, maybe it was just like a weird mechanism of thinking like, I'm keeping all this stuff because I have to write this thing someday. But a lot of the kind of materials that were consulted throughout my life, but like for this book, I'm assuming a lot of people know what the book's about, but it's about sort of the death of a very close friend. And I still have so many objects from the last time I saw him. I still have things that he left in my apartment. I still have all of these objects that don't spark joy, but they definitely feel meaningful and more valuable than like truly kind of like market valuable things, And they're things that I would keep in this padded envelope and move from apartment to apartment from like 1999 to 2009. Like, it was like always the thing, that and my Sony Vaio or my MacBook or whatever. Like, these were the things that I had to carry when I moved from apartment to apartment. And now I feel like I've not only turned myself into this character or turned these people in my life into characters, but a lot of these things feel like the kind of talismanic effect of these things has sort of evaporated, which is probably a better way to be, but it's very weird because these are things that I would always kind of put like right in my like top desk drawer, or sort of on my walls and things like that. And so it was very weird last week to actually put a lot of these things away and finally feel like I don't need them so close to me. And it was kind of wrenching in a weird way, but then I had to think about like what that actually said about my sense of self. Or I'm sorry, I was just watching my son leave. He will one day inherit all my stuff, so. Unless that was a different child, but. Okay. All right, cool.
One weird thing that's happened to me, and may happen to you one day, is to find myself getting nostalgic for research I once did. That is, like, being imaginatively, like, I wrote a book about New York City in the 19th century, and I get nostalgic for the period.
Like one of the greatest books. You're one of the greatest books of all time. Well. So.
Thank you. Anyway, just not fishing for praise. I'm very interested in that the fact that the imagination can have such power as to produce an effect like nostalgia that's not tethered to any actual daily concrete thing, and it's simply a matter of what's going on up there. Anyway.
Like, is it about like a discovery, or?
No, not really. It's more about I remember when I had a really clear idea of what it was to walk around in 1910. And it's almost as if I did walk around in 1910, and I haven't had that available to me. So there's, anyway, yeah. I'm digressing here. But
I think for me, it's less like historical necessarily, and I don't feel, even though there's a lot of the sort of marketing apparatus of the book that I have put forth, making T-shirts and zines and all these things, feels nostalgic. It's not meant to be nostalgic necessarily, but one thing that I found very melancholy as I was finishing the book was that I think when I started, I thought this will just be like the saddest book ever, because I was very sad. This was like, I was 21, it was 1998. It probably speaks to how blessed my life had been, that something could be just sort of so disruptive. But and so for a long time I thought, like, I will write this book that will not only be about this friendship and this person, but also it will be a history of the 1990s. And so there's like a version of this book that's 2.5 times as long, which my editor and agent dissuaded me from pursuing, because what was actually more interesting was how people experience history, not necessarily just like having these long digressive potted histories. But I felt by the time I finished the book that I had figured out a way to kind of go back to that time, and I really liked it. Like, I liked just hanging out with us. Like, I liked just hanging out with my friends and myself. And it was very sad because I would sort of I know what's going to happen next, and I know how you're going to not deal with things in the most healthy way. But that brought a lot of pleasure to be able to, and it was partly research, but it was partly just sort of some weird part of the process that I felt this very deep connection to this moment and being able to kind of walk around in it, which is honestly like all I ever wanted to do, was just to be able to spend a bit more time and walk around in the past for a little longer, not purely out of nostalgia, not purely because the music back then was better or anything like that, but just because there were things that I wanted to do that were like left. And so, there was a sort of deep melancholy as I finished, because I thought, I'm really enjoying hanging out back here, but it's not what I should be doing. It's not how I should be spending all my time.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, well, you're in that phase of life where nostalgia is not a thing. You just wait for 20 years. I wrote really dismissive stuff about nostalgia when I was in my 40s. But, things have changed. I love the image of you as a teenage investigator of youth culture, because I identified deeply with that. I kept thinking, in fact, it's like something we have in common is being, only children of immigrant parents, and that was like the way of establishing a connection where you didn't have siblings or people who could explain things to you. Is like you had to be a detective. And there's quite a lot of, your setting up of your early self emphasizes that.
Yeah, no, I was a shoddy one, but I was definitely very enthusiastic about my own discoveries. But I spent so much time with my mother when I was a child. My father had moved to Taiwan, and so she was kind of like my sidekick in a lot of these investigations. And I remember one time I had explained to her what slackers were, which she found she was like, this is not, you don't want to, this is not why I came to America, right? To learn, and they weren't necessarily like that about a lot of things, but she was like, wait, you're telling me that these people are just they're trying to do as little as possible. They're trying to be shiftless. And there's this moment where she was driving some friends and I to a debate tournament, and we were listening to Pavement, and then we were discussing what slackers were, and my classmates were like, is this what it's like to be an only child? You can make your mom talk to you about these things. And that was pretty accurate, actually. I was just joking with some folks at Doubleday because I wrote them a 10,000-word email about my day yesterday. And I was like, I'm reminded of how my mom used to play this game with me, which was called Summarize Something in as few words as possible. Because I thought she was as zealous about American cultures. I thought she wanted to know all this stuff. So I'd be like, dude, I just watched this movie, Iron Eagle 2. I'm gonna spend the next 2.5 hours telling you the plot of this hour and 40-minute movie. And so, yeah, I think being an only child, but with my specific parents, they showed enough interest, and I just sort of bust through that door with way too many stories and anecdotes and reference points.
Yeah, does your mother know the Monty Python routine, the summarize Proust contest?
No. I should introduce that to her. I think she'd be really. Although now she's just kind of like, look, you have your kid can do that to me, but you can't do that to me anymore. So.
Are we taking questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was really interested in what you both spoke about in terms of not absorbing lyrics in a song, and while you were like, oh yeah, my moment when I pay attention to a song is right before, I'm running. It's that's the part that hits me, and then I'm very curious to know if, now that I understand that both of you are immigrants of different generations, if you think that refusing an understanding of lyrics is also about I don't know this language. I'm just paying attention to other aspects of this song and not being faithful to what language literally is supposed to mean. I would love to hear both of your replies.
I love that, and I will use that now. I don't think it necessarily applies, but I think you are actually touching on, my dad loved Bob Dylan, or he still loves Bob Dylan, and it's because he lived in a boarding house in Massachusetts, and the kid who lived there would like just blast Bob Dylan all the time. My dad was like, "This is like not singing. This is terrible," but he eventually became. He really felt comfort in hearing these songs, and so then he started listening to Bob Dylan himself. But like Bob Dylan is not. I mean, my impression is like people like him because of the lyrics less than the quality of his singing, and so I do feel like I learned how to listen to music by watching my parents, and my parents would listen to a lot of music, but. My mom used to like give me allowance for transcribing. I had to transcribe Sinead O'Connor's "Nothing Compares to You." So like I bought the single and I just sat there like writing out the lyrics. But like my mom like fucking loved this song, and so clearly she was reacting to something that was like in the song, but it wasn't expressed like purely through the lyrics. And I do think, in the case of my parents, it probably had something to do with language and just sort of the models we consult for like listening and participating. Like listening is a form of participation, right? And so I think that was the case. I should say though that like when I write criticism, I do listen to lyrics because I feel like you're sort of obligated to, and it's just sort of part of being an attentive critic. But I find that like in my personal life, they have less significance.
Well, for me, I think I mean, I did start listening to popular music without really having much idea what they were saying at all. And, I mean, for years, this won't even mean anything to you, but, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels might yell out, "Suke!" What does that mean? And some of these things were mysteries forever. Their kids I got to one school and everybody was going around yelling, "Moti, Moti." Well, it turns out it's Multi by, oh my God, I'm going to forget the name, but it was some mid-60s garage band. Their drummer, Victor Moulton, had lost one arm. And he was called Multi, and it's all about his triumph still being a drummer after having it. So kids would just yell "Moti," and and it took me like 20 years to learn what this was. But I guess I learned to appreciate, lyrics with an impact, which basically meant choruses. Also, great songcraft. I mean, Smokey Robinson. "My smile is my makeup I wear since my breakup with you." I mean, you can't beat that with a stick. But most pop song lyrics are junk. They're awful. They're meaningless. They're just reiterations of platitudes. So why would you pay attention to them, really? I mean, if you're really into like matching your moods to, putting on, okay, today I'm feeling 47% happy, so I'm going to put on the appropriate Simon and Garfunkel record. Well, okay, good, but. I don't know. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Back there. You got to shout, or else come up and get the mic.
I'm just gonna yell. First of all, do songs get ruined by memory for you? And if so, if the song is good
Yes.
enough, can you get over it?
Are songs ruined by memory, and if so?
Can you get over it if the song is good enough?
What is a good song, really? Yeah, I mean, what? That is a good song. Yeah, I think obviously songs can be ruined by memory. This will only make sense like a couple people in this room, but I had a roommate in college who listened to The Lady in Red over and over and over. And it was because, he loved the song, but then he went to a prom with this girl who wore a red dress, and he thought it was all meant to be. It was a terrible night. It was bad, and it ruined the song for him. But I still think it's a good song myself. So it's not my memory that's being challenged there. There are songs actually that I sort of make fun of in the book that I now like like a lot. And it's actually because the force of my former memory has been supplanted by like new memories I want to create, if that makes sense. So there are songs that like I violently hated as a teenager that I now kind of am consciously choosing to have a different relationship with. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't that bad.
I mean, songs can be ruined by popularity. If that counts as memory, it's overexposure. But, I guess songs can be tainted by an event. I mean, I don't know that's really happened in my life. I don't know. I mean, when I discovered that I'd been written out of my grandfather's will, I was never able to hear that song. I don't know.
All right, over here.
In writing a memoir that isn't necessarily about like the immediate past, are there elements that you feel are allowed to be a little more fictionalized than others? And like what for you kind of differentiates a sort of restrained autofiction from like nonfiction?
Lucy? That's a very good question that I'm not... I mean, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say there's fiction in my book, but there's definitely interpretation. And I think that I sort of try to deal with that question by making it as clear as I could that this was a latter-day interpretation, right? Or that there were things I didn't realize then that I realize now, which is probably a sentence I write in the book like countless times. But I don't know, like I'm not an avid reader of memoir, so I haven't like waded into these debates around like memoir, autofiction. Personally speaking, I tried to be as, I don't want to say truthful, even though the book suggests that it's true, but I wanted to be as accurate as I could be, but accurate in terms of my own memories. Like there are quite a few people in this room who, like if I tried to report the book and actually talk to everyone about their memories, it probably would have produced a very different book. But since so much of my book is about being stuck in the past and being in some ways trapped within your own memories, it was important for me to only consult my memories as best as I could for quite a bit of it. And then later on, if someone said something incredibly good, I would say, like, I'm using that in my book, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do going into it, if that makes sense, because then it would become fiction, in my mind at least, because these are things that I couldn't have possibly known or thought myself. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Yeah, did you feel inhibited by writing about other people who, you knew very well and still know probably and hang out with, and, did you're like appropriating them in some way? I mean, you're writing this book even maybe, but you have this power that can't be reciprocated.
I still feel like weird about it. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say I felt inhibited, because even going back years, I would tell people, like, I'm going to write about all this someday. But I had no idea what that meant, and they had no idea what that could possibly mean either. So it literally wasn't until I finished the first draft that I realized, like, oh, this is what I've been trying to do. Like, I thought I was just trying to tell a story about this moment in the past. In reality, I'm trying to use the past to envision a future. And I felt a lot of anxiety, to some extent I still do, about the fact that there are other people in the book who are characters. I think I'm the most absurd person in the book because I'm in the book the most. But yeah, no, that was definitely probably the aspect of it that I found most vexing, was just sort of how to like convey to my friends how much I care about them and love them, but in ways that didn't make everyone seem like a superhero. And also in some ways to have these like conversations with my friends that I think if we were different, or not if we were different, if we were a different time, if there were different like mechanisms and structures in place when things happen when you're in college, like maybe we would have had these conversations in the past, or maybe our conversations in the past would have been different. But yeah, so I hope it's read that way too.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, it's taken me years to confront that one myself. You know, including like sometimes putting people under initials to disguise their attitude, their identity a little bit. You know, like sticking sunglasses on them. You know.
I would never wear sunglasses. It's clearly not me. Yeah. I did give anyone who was in the book more than twice like the option to change their name. So there was that. But yeah, I don't know. It's sort of I guess it's part of writing a memoir is having to think about these things.
Yeah, there's the kind of Rashomon effect. Yeah. Yes, you've got a question.
Hi, it's a question. So I think influencing taste, like you do with writing reviews, is a way of forming legacy. And you've mentioned a couple of times your memories of your parents and their music taste and your son. And I wonder how intentional or how much do you think about the way you're influencing your children's future tastes? So, for example, Shania Twain will live on because my dad loved Shania Twain. All I listened to from the age of like
Nice.
5. Yeah, that's just a question for you.
I'm glad my kid's not here right now. It's very humbling to have a child. I do not try and influence his taste at all because I'm his father. So, you know, I feel like a lot of people have this relationship where they're like, oh yeah, I'm like, my kid looks up to me so much. Like he just wants to be just like me. I have the other type of child where they don't actually care or anything. Yesterday, my kid was like, I read your book. It's good. And I said, what did you like about it? He's like, you know, the middle part. Those are good words, but he, yeah, no, it's like he's into Lightyear, the movie, so he got really into David Bowie's song Starman, and I was like, Zeke, if you like Starman, I have like 7 other David Bowie songs you like. He's like, I don't even like the song, I just like this one part of it. So, but I feel like, you know, to bring it back, I do feel like so much of what you learn from people around you, if you allow yourself to, is kind of how they act and how they react to things, not necessarily the words they're using, right, or the ideas that they're sharing with you. And, you know, so much of, I think, me reflecting on this moment in my life, my book, was like how did other people, how did they express warmth or kindness, you know, other than through language? And so, you know, I hope my child or notices these things without me being like, there are other songs that you should be into, because that's clearly not working, even though he does like The Cure a lot right now, which does not have anything to do with me, and I've tried to sort of steer clear of that. But yeah, no, I don't. I'm happy that he just likes things at all. So, did you feel like how would you answer that question?
I could barely hear it because I'm deaf.
How important do you think it is to shape the tastes of young people, i.e. children, or maybe even people you teach?
You can't do it. I mean, you will in a certain kind of way, but I mean, it's like saying I'm going to shape my child's personality. You know, there's no accounting for this. I mean, my parents, you know, I mean, well, my parents really couldn't influence me much. Well, my father was a fan of prose. You know, he quoted Victor Hugo a lot, and this is as far as it went. My mother never read a book in her life, so. You know, I really was not much influenced by my parents at all in that way, except maybe negatively. And, you know, as far as like students, young people, I mean, you can show them the book, and maybe they'll dig it and maybe they'll hate it. I mean, I had both experiences in my educational process, as I'm sure you did too. It's kind of chance, it's kind of personality related, and it has to do with changing and passing time as well, so, yeah. Who's got another one?
One more?
Yes.
One more question.
So in writing a book that is so rooted in the past, as a person who cares very much about ephemera from the past, and having the sort of like central fulcrum be rooted in a traumatic event, have you found yourself, whether it was writing a book or the years leading up to what led to the book, and even now in the present tense, have you found yourself, or do you find yourself creating like an idealized version of who he might be now in the present tense, were he still here? Has there ever been sort of like a what if kind of a ghost lingering around with you, traveling with you, whatever course calls that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was much easier for me when we were younger because it's easy to imagine what someone looks like a year later, you know. But I think around when I turned 30, probably, I thought like, fuck, I don't even know if we'd be friends anymore, you know. I think the weird thing to realize as I was writing the book is that the only reason to write the book is because the friendship is sort of like the physical version of the friendship is over, you know. And so that process, that need to kind of archive stuff, all the notes I would write to myself, all of the letters I would write, like you would only do that because you felt like you had to, you know. Otherwise, as a young person, you're sort of morally obliged to not care about this stuff and to just keep looking forward and to go on to the next adventure. And so for there to be no adventures left, I think that's why I became so fixated on archiving the past. There's still things that I write about in my journals incessantly, and I'm like, you really should have like annotated this because I don't know what the great egg fiasco was, and I'm dying to know because you guys reference it all the time. But no, I mean, I honestly am, you know, like I made really, this is like an advertisement for the concept of college. I made a lot of really close friends when I was an undergraduate, and I think our intimacy was sort of accelerated by having this thing happen that we shared. But, you know, I think that the sort of feelings that compelled me to write this book are more about, you know, loss and just sort of like the ending of a timeline. And so I think when I really think about it, like I don't know who I would be had I not experienced this. I probably would not have like become so serious about writing because I wouldn't have had this thing that I wanted to write about, you know, as a 21-year-old. And as a result, then I think, well, I would have probably continued being this, he would have continued going this way. It's probably, like, if you run that 10 times, like, it's probably more likely than not that we would have just naturally drifted apart, the way people drift apart after college. But I think part of the reason a lot of my friends and I from that time are so close or have never really left each other's lives is because we share this and because we experience this sort of moment of weird intensity together. And, you know, I'm talking way too much now, but I've had a lot of conversations with people who I've talked to nonstop since 1998 about the ways in which we were like literally affected, the things we do, the habits we keep. And these aren't things that we ever really talked about before, but it clearly kind of shaped all of our senses of what it meant to be there for other people, not that, yeah, and to sort of just be present and to think about the future. So on that note, I just really want to express my sincere thanks to everyone who's here. There's so many of my of people that I've sort of come up with in the writing world, in academia, so many former students who have taught me just as much as, taught me more than I've taught them, if we're being truthful. There's so many colleagues, so many people that I've worked with. It's just really incredible to be able to share this space with you. So also, obviously, Pioneer Works, it's cool to have a book party at all, and to have one in a space like this is really something I'll never forget. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone for being here. Oh, hold on. Also, I should just reiterate that this is a free event, and it would be great to support Pioneer Works in some way. So there is this cassette that I made. It's an actual literal book on tape. There's a link to, if you don't have a tape player, of the audiobook with all sorts of like random music and TV commercials woven into it. So please support Pioneer Works. The raffle should be open for a little longer, but yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to Lucy as well.